Welcome to this discussion of results-based financing and the book supply chain. My name is Alison Ziki and I'm from Room to Read. I want to open this discussion with a quotation from an African publisher who says that in contrast to their Western and Asian counterparts, many African children grow up without ever having seen, let alone owned, beautiful, well-illustrated books which inspire them to a life of reading, beauty, learning, and curiosity for the world. With a youthful population, there is a pressing need to produce more content that will invite children to dream, to question, to imagine, to look to the past with a view to understanding the present and provoking the future. End of quote. This quote speaks to the reality of many South African children, which is that they grow up with little or no access at all to any age-appropriate and culturally relevant books that they can read for pleasure. For most African children, the only books they get to interact with are textbooks. This is because the current book supply chain emphasizes formal classroom materials over supplementary books children can read for pleasure. This has meant that supporting home language storybooks is on the main for publishers. The book supply chain in South Africa faces some serious bottlenecks. These bottlenecks range from a centralized distribution system and a lack of funding to capacity challenges among creatives of African language books, especially. Stakeholders in the children's book ecosystem have been trying to come up with innovative solutions to some of these bottlenecks. One such solution is results-based financing. Results-based financing holds out the promise of tackling spending inefficiencies and making more effective use of resources. Results-based financing is an umbrella term referring to any program or intervention that provides rewards to individuals or institutions after agreed upon results are achieved and verified. The approach has the potential to provide a stronger focus on the actions necessary to improve learning outcomes, foster local solutions to common education challenges, and to strengthen the capacity of the local book chain to operate more effectively. This discussion uses the case study of the REACH-funded project in South Africa, which ran from 2017 to 2019, which had results-based financing as one of its innovations. The discussion also looks at the other innovations that accompanied the REACH project, such as open licensing, pooled procurement, the formation of public-private partnerships, versioning, the use of the book dash model. And in this discussion, we want also to try to assess the extent to which these innovations assisted in addressing the challenges confronting the book supply chain. So, like I was saying, some of the challenges, some of the bottlenecks that the book supply chain faces include the lack of a culture of reading and the lack of community libraries. In South Africa, we know that only about 15% of the population reads for pleasure. So there's a serious lack of a reading culture. And this then creates a vicious cycle where if you approach publishers and ask them why they do not produce books in local languages that people could read for pleasure, they will say we do not produce such books because there's no market for them. But when you go to the market, to the readers, and ask them why they do not read books in local languages, they will tell you that we do not read such books because they are not available. So a vicious cycle is created. And in many rural areas, communal centers like libraries usually play a crucial role of getting books to communities. In the most depressed communities, however, these libraries are either non-existent or they are dilapidated buildings without any books. The demand side of the equation is critically compromised by lack of funding. So this compounds then the lack of a reading culture. Most creatives also lack the needed skills and financial incentives for them to become professionals. So there are several challenges that the local book supply chain faces. And like I was saying, there is that vicious cycle that has been created that evolves around the lack of the culture of reading. But first, let's look at what the REACH project was all about. This project aimed to strengthen the children's books ecosystem by addressing some of the bottlenecks in the book supply chain. And the project aimed to do this through, first, increasing the supply of quality books in African languages, and second, through raising awareness of the critical need for storybooks in mother tongue that children can read for pleasure, and books that create a love of reading amongst the children, and books that can then, through that, help to improve reading outcomes. So the REACH project had several innovations, and amongst them was results-based financing, but also pooled procurement, open licensing, public-private partnerships, versioning, and the book dash. Partnership between the government, the NGOs, and publishers to create and to distribute storybooks in 5 underserved indigenous languages of South Africa. And these languages were Sepedi, Tsonga, Siswati, isiZulu, and Venda. For the first time at a national level, the REACH project brought together under one roof the country's key literacy, publishing, and children book experts to create this public-private partnership. And the partnership resulted in a national conference, which then developed the national guidelines, which provide a strong basis for understanding and discussing storybooks and reading for pleasure in South Africa. The other innovation of the project was open licensing. To benefit others beyond this project, Room to Read applied a Creative Commons license to all project materials developed under the REACH project, which then allows anyone to freely use the material. The project partnered with licensing experts to build the capacity of publishers and others on open licensing concepts. The REACH project chose the CC BY license, which is the most open and flexible license, allowing for others to distribute, to remix, to tweak, and to build upon the original work, even commercially, as long as they credit the original creators for the original creation. This then enables the storybooks to be widely distributed to be versioned or translated into other languages and to be adapted for other contexts. The other main innovation of the REACH project was pooled procurement. And pooled procurement involves combining print orders to achieve lower unit costs. In other words, orders for printing are consolidated, and this increases the print runs. And by increasing the print runs, you then lower the unit costs of books. So the REACH project incorporated and coached publishers on several strategies to increase publisher profit. These strategies included using the sliding scale by language model, where prices were set by language. What happened here was that the more commercially viable languages like English were priced higher than the less commercially viable languages. So then the costs of the less commercially viable languages were then absorbed by the more commercially viable languages. And then the other strategy was co-edition printing, which involves printing multiple languages in the same print run. The other strategy was publisher collaboration, where publishers share stories with each other so that each can create versions in their own language and then printing together to achieve lower unit costs or lower unit prices. The last strategy was then the pooling of orders, realizing economies of scale by combining small orders or consolidating small orders into one big order as a way of increasing print run and taking down unit costs. And then the other innovation was the results-based financing, which is the focus of this discussion. So results-based financing, or RBF, had several impacts. The most visible one for us was the incentivizing of writers and publishers. But even beyond that, we noticed that results-based financing and pooled procurement enabled the project to print and distribute local language books at much lower costs. The books could be sold at less than 10 Rand each, which was almost like the cheapest books we had ever seen. And the last payment to the publishers in the project was tied to their engagement in pooled procurement. So this incentivized the publishers to participate in this model of pooled procurement. So what then that told us was that results-based financing is a great way of encouraging stakeholders to try new innovative models of doing things, of doing business. South Africa has 11 national languages. The Publishers Association of South Africa reported that in 2018, approximately 90% of publishing profit came from materials in English and Afrikaans. Material published in all African languages combined only equaled 10% of profits. So the results-based financing and pooled procurement can change that, in that you can use these new innovative models to create more profit using, or more profit from African languages. So just to round up key project impacts, besides those of the results-based financing that we've just spoken about, the REACH project established quality standards for children's storybook development. In South Africa, these are freely available, downloadable from the World Bank site, plus also from Room to Read government websites. The project promoted a culture of reading through making high-quality storybooks in local languages more accessible to children. And then the model introduced new models for content development to local publishers. But also there was a lot of capacity building in the project, or as a result of the project. Capacity building of writers, capacity building of publishers, capacity building of illustrators. And then the project managed to distribute over 100,000 copies of storybooks in local languages, the 5 local languages that the project worked in: isiZulu, Siswati, Venda, Tonga, and Sepedi. And then another important impact or benefit of the project was the capturing of community voices. The writers of the stories used in the project were picked from the communities in which these languages are spoken. And so we ended up with authentic, genuine community voices. And this, to a large extent, also helped in empowering marginalized voices. And one other critical impact of the project has been the creation of communities of practice, where writers who were maybe not so well known were introduced and allowed to operate in the same space as more experienced writers, networking, same with illustrators, same with designers. I thank you. Thank you very much for listening.